welcome to Reformed Thinking. So, what if I told you that in the ancient world, if a guy found himself in this horrifying situation where he had to choose between saving his wife from certain death or saving his brother, society expected him to choose his brother every single time.
Yeah, not only expected it, but they would view him as morally corrupt if he chose his wife.
Which is just a staggering realization.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, it completely breaks the machinery we use to understand relationships today. Usually when we look at the concept of family, we have a very specific set of blueprints.
Right.
You grow up, you find a spouse, you fall in love, you move out, and you start your own independent unit. That's like the gold standard.
It is. It's the core assumption of Western society, really.
But then you step into the world of the first century Mediterranean, and suddenly those blueprints are entirely useless.
Yeah, you're looking at a social landscape that operates on a completely different gravitational pull.
Right. And that same feeling of looking at something familiar only to realize the machinery we are using to diagnose it is just broken. That happens when we open the Bible and read about the family.
It happens all the time.
So if you are listening to this, if you have ever read the New Testament and wondered why sibling language is everywhere or why Jesus makes such radical demands regarding our earthly relatives, this deep dive is for you.
Absolutely.
Today, we are investigating the ancient Mediterranean family model. Our mission is to understand the massive societal shift early Christians made by calling themselves a family.
And as Reformed believers, we obviously approach these biblical texts as authoritative truth.
Right. The Westminster Confession is clear on that.
Spot on.
Yeah.
We recognize that God utilized this specific cultural framework to communicate the massive shift brought about by Jesus and the early church.
So to get there, we are looking at research on Mediterranean family systems, specifically relying on the historical and anthropological work of scholars like Joseph H. Hellerman.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, we have to start by defining what family actually meant back then compared to what we see when we look around our own neighborhoods today.
Yeah, to grasp how the early church redefined family, we have to recognize that our modern American concept is what anthropologists call a kindred system.
A kindred system.
Right. Think about how you would map out your family tree right now. In a kindred system, family membership is determined by relationships connecting to a single living individual.
Meaning you are at the center of the map.
Yes. Your family includes your parents, your siblings, your cousins, and crucially, relatives by marriage.
Oh, I see. So if you host a Thanksgiving dinner, you invite your aunt by marriage, your brother-in-law, maybe your spouse's grandparents?
Exactly. I mean, spot on. You consider them your family, even though you share absolutely no biological ancestor with them.
Right. In our system, my wife and I are the core of our family unit, but we are not blood relatives.
No, you each have your own set of biological ancestors.
Yet, in our culture, the marriage relationship is lifted up as the absolute pinnacle of family life. Everything revolves around that chosen partnership.
But the research points out that in the ancient world, they operated under a completely different framework called a patrilineal kinship group system, or a PKG.
A PKTG.
Yeah, and in this system, family membership is strictly about consanguinity.
Which means blood.
Yes, it is entirely based on sharing the blood of a common male ancestor.
Man, the exclusivity of that bloodline boundary is startling to a modern mind.
It really is. Let's visualize this. Imagine you are drawing an ancient family tree on a piece of paper. The patriarch stands at the top.
Okay, got the patriarch.
You draw lines down to his children, and you fill in the bodies of everyone who physically possesses the patriarch's blood with solid black ink.
So everyone who shares his DNA gets filled in.
Right. Everyone else is left as an empty outline. The moment you look at the patriarch's wife, you realize she is an empty outline.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she is technically an outsider to his family because she has a different father. She does not share the patriarch's blood.
That is such a jarring image for us. Both the sons and daughters of that patriarch are filled in with solid ink. They have the father's blood.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker. Only the sons can pass that bloodline to the next generation.
That's the vital distinction. The daughters have the blood, but the line stops with them.
So the grandchildren on the son's side belong to the patriarch's family. The grandchildren on the daughter's side belong to a completely different family entirely.
You do.
Think of the ancient family less like a modern social network and more like an exclusive inherited citizenship.
That's a really good way to frame it.
Like, if you don't hold the right passport, the male bloodline, you are fundamentally an expatriate.
Right.
Even if you sleep in the same house and eat at the same table every single day.
And understand why they did this? We have to look at the brutal realities of their world.
Because it wasn't just them being mean.
Right. No, the cultural rationale behind this strict patrilineal system was survival, plain and simple.
Right.
They lived in an environment plagued by famine, warfare, and staggering infant mortality rates. The survival of the group always, without exception, took precedence over the desires of the individual.
It had to.
Retaining resources, holding on to arable land, and maintaining social status required a clearly defined, unbroken chain of inheritance.
Because if daughters could pass on the family bloodline,
Then the family's resources would legally disperse into other competing families when those daughters married and had children.
oh, I see. It spreads the wealth out until there's nothing left to defend.
Precisely. By keeping the bloodline strictly male, the family structure remained a closed, defensible fortress.
This completely changes our reading of biblical genealogies.
Oh, it flips it entirely.
Like, we often read the genealogies in Matthew or in Second Temple literature like Pseudo-Philo, and we wonder why they almost exclusively list male offspring.
Right. And modern readers often impose modern egalitarian sensibilities on the text and feel frustrated.
We wonder where all the women are.
But when we understand the patrilineal kinship group system, we see that they were simply tracing the legal and biological passport of the family.
Yeah, the males were the only ones who possessed the legal mechanism to transmit that citizenship to the next generation.
It was a property deed, not a sentimental family scrapbook.
That's such a striking thought. A property deed.
And because the bloodline is passed strictly through males, this alters the function of marriage in ways that are deeply, extremely uncomfortable for modern people to process.
Yeah, this brings up the reality of women in the ancient world.
In the PKG, marriage was not a romantic endeavor. It was a legally binding social contract between two distinct corporate entities.
Two families.
Right.
So if you were drawing up a marriage contract back then, you only cared about three things. Does this make our family look better in the community?
Yep.
Will it give us a legitimate heir to carry the passport?
For sure.
And how does the money, the land, and the property change hands?
That's all it was. Personal satisfaction or romance was a secondary byproduct, if it happened at all.
It was never the goal.
Never. Energies were passionately directed toward the success of the extended family, not the happiness of the couple.
So how do they decide who married who?
Well, we see two main strategies for these contracts. First, there is endogamous marriage.
Endogamous. Marrying within the group.
Yes, marrying within the extended kin group, like marrying a cousin. This kept resources tight and strengthened the family from within. It prevented land from leaving the clan.
Okay, that makes sense from a survival standpoint.
Second, there is exogamous marriage, marrying outside the group. This was used purely to build political or economic alliances with rival families.
So the daughters are basically strategic assets.
Spot on.
Sure.
In either scenario, a daughter was not a free agent. She belonged to her father's patrilineal until the patriarch decided how to use her to strengthen the family's position.
Wow.
Her individual desires were entirely secondary to the strategic positioning of her bloodline.
There is this brutal line from the ancient apocryphal book of Sirach, chapter 22, verse 3. It says, "The birth of a daughter is a loss."
It's hard to even read that today.
To our ears, that is horrifying. But in their economic reality, raising a daughter meant expending resources on a child who would eventually be given away to build up another family's workforce and lineage.
Yeah.
When a daughter married, she physically packed her belongings and moved in with her husband's family. But as we established with the ink and outline visual earlier...
She remained an outsider.
Right, because she lacked their blood. Her only real security in this new alien environment was producing a male heir to continue her husband's patrilineal.
Yeah, that was her lifeline.
But I have to ask a challenging question here, because if the wife is essentially an imported worker and marriage is just a contract, didn't anyone love their spouse back then?
It's a fair question.
Like, are we saying ancient marriages were totally devoid of human affection?
No, human nature has not changed, so marital affection absolutely existed.
Okay.
But it was not the priority of the social structure. We can look at the historical account of Herod the Great and his wife Mariam.
Oh, that's a wild story.
It really is. Herod had an intense, consuming affection for Mariam. But their marriage was not born of a chance meeting and romance. It was initially contracted to align Herod's family with the Hasmonean royal line to secure his political legitimacy.
It was a business deal first.
Exactly. And when political tensions arose and push came to shove, The survival and honor of his power structure trumped his emotional fulfillment.
Yeah, he eventually had her executed.
Right. The expectation of finding your primary emotional support and identity in a spouse is a modern Western luxury.
A luxury. That's fascinating.
In the ancient Mediterranean, a good marriage was simply one that enhanced the honor and economic position of the extended family without causing public scandal.
Wait, so you were telling me that the physical living arrangements were completely dictated by this system too?
Oh, totally.
We call it patrilineal residence. Daughters marry out, and sons stay close to the father. What did that actually look like on the ground?
Well, a typical household looked entirely different from our nuclear family setup. We get a vivid glimpse of this in Matthew 10, verses 35 and 36, where Jesus says, "He came to set a man against his father, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law."
To a modern reader, that just sounds like family tension, like fighting at Thanksgiving.
Yeah, but Jesus is describing a specific physical living arrangement. This household included the patriarch, his wife, the firstborn son and his incoming wife, the younger sons, and the unmarried daughters.
All under one roof.
Basically, they are all living in extremely close proximity, usually sharing a single central courtyard, cooking at the same fire, and working the same fields.
Honestly, sharing a single courtyard with my father, my brothers, and all their wives, that sounds like a recipe for a reality TV show meltdown.
Oh, it was incredibly tense.
There is no privacy. There is no concept of kids turning 18, going to college, and moving across the country to find themselves.
None at all. And the idea of a man moving in with his wife's family, what anthropologists call metrolocal residence, that was considered an absolute disgrace.
Really?
Yeah.
Just moving to the wife's family's farm was disgraceful.
Yes. There is an incredible ancient Syriac text called the Ahikar legend. Ahikar is a wise counselor, and he offers a series of proverbs. One of them says that carrying heavy iron and hauling stones is physically lighter than settling in a father-in-law's house.
Wow. He'd rather haul stones.
You also see this dynamic in the ancient romance of Tobit. The character Tobias is incredibly reluctant to let his new bride Sarah stay with her parents.
Because it would reflect poorly on him.
Right. He waits until they are entirely without any patrilineal relatives before he even considers making that move.
That physical proximity was tied to rigid economic reality, right?
Yeah, the family was both a consuming unit and a producing unit. They had to work together to eat.
We see a clear biblical example of this in Mark chapter 1, verses 16 through 20.
Oh, the fishermen.
Right. Jesus walks by the Sea of Galilee and calls James and John. The text notes they leave their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men.
It wasn't just a weekend hobby.
No, they were running a multi-generational family fishing enterprise. This was heavy, dangerous physical labor, maintaining nets, managing boats, and handling hired workers.
And it makes you realize how economically locked in people were.
Yeah, you couldn't just get frustrated with your dad, move to the next town over, and submit a resume for a different career.
You couldn't. Your family was your employer, your landlord, your bank, and your safety net.
To leave your family meant walking away from your entire economic viability.
You would become destitute overnight.
That is the harsh reality.
And this economic structure placed an immense crushing burden on the incoming wife.
Because she's stepping into this locked-in machine.
Right. Think about her situation. She is a young woman, an outsider with no blood connection to these people, living in a cramped patrilineal household.
Working every single day for her father-in-law's enterprise.
Under the strict supervision of her mother-in-law. She is surrounded by a family that does not inherently trust her.
Man, that sounds miserable.
Her only path to permanent security, her only way to truly anchor herself in this alien family setting is through her children.
Which explains the sheer agony of barrenness in the ancient world.
Yes, it puts a whole new lens on it.
It wasn't just a private sadness about not having a baby. It was a massive crisis of survival, status, and economic security.
If she doesn't produce an heir, she can be discarded.
We read Rachel's desperate, screaming plea to Jacob in Genesis, "Give me sons or I shall die."
It wasn't hyperbole.
Right. We see the character Manoah in the writings of Pseudo-Philo threatening to divorce and take another wife because his current wife hasn't produced fruit.
Yeah, look at Hannah in 1 Samuel.
Yes, Hannah is relentlessly, cruelly taunted by her husband's other wife, Peninnah. Peninnah had sons standing around him like a plantation of olive trees while Hannah wept bitterly.
The stakes were literally life and death for her standing in the household.
And when a son is finally born to this isolated woman, she cultivates a uniquely intense bond with him.
She does. She views that son as her singular foothold in the household.
This bond goes far beyond what Western observers might consider typical maternal affection.
Oh, absolutely. Anthropologists note that the mother pours all her emotional energy, her ambition, and her political maneuvering into this boy.
I think of it like a modern corporate merger.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you are an outside executive brought into a massive family-owned business, you have no real security until you secure a permanent seat on the board of directors.
Right.
For the ancient woman, birthing a son was getting that seat on the board. And you better believe she is going to make sure that seat gives her leverage.
That's a great analogy. We see this explicitly in the ancient text of Jubilees, chapter 25, where Rebekah blesses Jacob.
She doesn't just say a nice prayer, does she?
No, she says her affection and her breasts are blessing him, and she demands he heed her voice. She is actively, aggressively maneuvering him into a position of dominance over his brother Esau so she can secure her own future.
She is playing the political game of the household.
We see the same intense maneuvering in Roman history. The historian Tacitus describes Livia, the wife of Caesar Augustus.
What did she do?
She wasn't just a passive empress. She was plotting with secret intrigues, eliminating rivals, to secure the Roman Empire for her son Tiberius from a previous marriage.
Talk about helicopter parenting.
Seriously. And Agrippina went to even more notorious lengths. She manipulated the entire Roman Senate and arranged an incestuous marriage to her uncle, Emperor Claudius.
Just to get her son on the throne.
Yes, solely to promote her son Nero. The mother's entire political ambition and future safety is channeled entirely through the son.
The absolute tragedy of this dynamic is depicted in the Second Temple text for Maccabees.
Yeah, chapters 15 and 16.
Right. It describes a mother who is forced to watch her 7 sons suffer martyrdom. The author highlights the utter devastation of losing sons before they can produce heirs.
She laments that she bore 7 sons and is now the mother of none.
And that she will never know the happiness of being called a grandmother. The loss of her sons wasn't just immense emotional heartbreak, it was the total erasure of her legacy, her economic safety, and her standing within the patriline.
So the mother-son bond was a crucial survival strategy. But here is where the social structure gets fascinating.
Okay, all right.
While the mother-son bond was strong, the ultimate unbreakable bond in the ancient world was horizontal.
Horizontal meaning.
It was the bond between siblings who shared the exact same blood. This is the absolute pinnacle of ancient relationships, sibling solidarity.
This might be the starkest contrast with our modern worldview.
It really is.
In our kindred system, we look to our spouse for our primary emotional support, our companionship, our deepest secrets.
But in the ancient PKG, the sibling group provided that emotional fulfillment. The tightest unit of loyalty, affection, and trust was the descent group of brothers and sisters.
You see this hierarchy clearly in ancient literature. There is a quote from Ben Sira, chapter 25, verse 1, where the author lists things that are beautiful in the sight of the Lord.
The order he uses is really telling.
He places agreement between brothers first, ahead of a wife and husband who live in harmony.
Given a choice between a harmonious marriage and agreement among brothers, the ancient mind favored the brothers every single time.
Because the marital bond was contracted, the sibling bond was biological reality.
100%. If we look at the research from modern anthropologists in places that still operate somewhat like this, it makes total sense.
Like where?
The researchers, Fallers, conducted a study of a village named Edremit in rural Turkey. They observed a woman named Aziz and her husband Mustafa.
Okay.
To a Western eye, their marriage looked cold. Aziz had absolutely no romantic expectations of Mustafa. He was not a major source of companionship or emotional sharing for her.
So who did she talk to? Who supported her?
Her brother. Her relationship with her brother possessed a highly effective, deeply emotional reliance. Even into later life, brothers remain their sister's primary source of companionship, advice, and physical defense against a harsh world.
That's amazing.
Ian Whitaker's anthropological study of Geg society in Albania confirms the exact same dynamic.
He found the same thing.
Yes. He found that a woman's true point of social identification remains her natal kin group, her brothers, for her entire life, not the family she marries into.
This sheds massive light on how we read the New Testament.
Oh, huge. Think about Mark 10.
Peter points out to Jesus that the disciples have left everything to follow him.
And what does Jesus say?
Jesus responds by listing the extreme sacrifices required for the kingdom. Leaving house, brothers, sisters, mother, father, children, or fields.
Look at what is completely missing from that list. A spouse.
Leaving a spouse is not even mentioned. That blows my mind.
In their cultural framework, Separating from a spouse was certainly difficult, but it was not considered the highest or most agonizing sacrifice a person could make.
Leaving your blood siblings was the ultimate, unimaginable cost.
And it really was.
This completely challenges our modern reading of these texts. We constantly elevate the nuclear husband and wife unit. They elevated the bloodline sibling unit above all else.
Because sibling solidarity was the highest ideal in their universe, the severing of that bond was considered the most gripping, horrifying tragedy imaginable.
So, any situation that forced divided loyalties between a spouse and a sibling became high drama.
The highest drama.
There is a story from the historian Josephus about Herod the Great's brother, Pheroras.
Oh, this is a great example.
Pheroras was deeply attached to his wife, which was already seen as somewhat unusual. Herod, being paranoid and controlling, demanded that Pheroras divorce his wife and marry a royal princess to build a political alliance.
He basically forced him to choose sides between his brother and his wife,
And Pheroras shockingly chose his wife.
which was scandalous.
This was seen as so utterly countercultural, such a massive violation of the natural order of sibling solidarity, that Herod actually suggested Pheroras had been bewitched by potions.
He literally couldn't comprehend a man choosing his wife over his brother without dark magic being involved.
That is wild.
We see that same excruciating tension in Plutarch's account of Octavia.
Who is Octavia?
Think about Octavia's position. She is the half-sister of Octavian, the man who would soon become the Emperor Caesar Augustus. But she is married to Mark Antony.
Okay, so these are the two most powerful men on the planet.
Yes, and they are hurtling toward a massive, bloody civil war. Plutarch records this devastating scene where Octavia is caught in the middle.
And what does she do?
She is standing there in tears, passionately begging the men around her to see her impossible position. She cries out that no matter who wins this war, she will be utterly miserable.
Right, because if her husband wins, her brother is destroyed. If her brother wins, her husband is destroyed.
She is the literal embodiment of the ancient world's worst nightmare, the clash between the family you were born into and the family you are contracted to.
That story must have captivated ancient readers because it put a magnifying glass on their deepest anxieties.
Definitely. In modern times, our movie plots and prestige dramas almost always revolve around marital infidelity. But in antiquity, the most dramatic tension revolved around sibling treachery.
Brother betrayal was the archetypal societal breakdown.
It was.
It is no accident that in the biblical narrative, the first violent evil act after the expulsion from Eden is not a marital breakdown, but Cain murdering his brother Abel.
Yeah, that sets the stage for everything. And Greek mythology gives us the tragic story of Eteocles and Polynices, brothers who murder each other, battling for the throne of Thebes.
Roman tradition rests on the foundation myth of Romulus killing his brother Remus.
It's everywhere. Josephus writes extensively about this fear, detailing how Cleopatra systematically killed her own siblings to secure power.
And how Aristobulus imprisoned and starved his brother Antigonus.
Josephus actually remarks that this murder was sure proof that calumny severs all ties of affection.
Their logic was simple. If blood brothers who share the exact same essence could not prevail against envy and greed, society itself was doomed.
And to prevent that societal breakdown, siblings were expected to side with siblings against outsiders, no matter the circumstances.
Protecting family honor was paramount.
Right or wrong didn't matter. Blood mattered.
Josephus recounts a wild situation involving a ruler named Archelaus. Archelaus was a terrible, brutal ruler, and his own relatives genuinely hated him.
They couldn't stand him.
But when an embassy from Judea went to Caesar Augustus to formally vote against Archelaus and have him removed, his relatives refused to join the embassy.
Why?
They believed they would be deeply disgraced in the eyes of Caesar if they acted against their own kin in public, even a kin member they privately despised.
They'd rather suffer under a tyrant brother than publicly shame him. We see that same fierce protection in Plutarch's story about Mark Antony's mother, Julia.
What happened there?
Well, when political assassins came to kill her brother, Lucius Caesar assassins who were sent by her own son, Mark Antony, she stood in front of the door, physically barring their entrance.
Her own son sent them.
Yes, she told the armed soldiers they would have to kill her before they could kill her brother. She successfully saved his life by invoking that intense sibling obligation.
She dared the soldiers to violate the sacred bond of kin.
Exactly. I mean, spot on.
Protecting that honor internally meant concealing faults from outsiders.
Right. All heavily. In the PKG, protecting the family's public honor takes precedence over telling the factual truth to outsiders.
The texts are full of this. The Akar legend has the protagonist using deceit to protect his honor.
And in the pseudepigraphal text called the Testament of Joseph, Joseph actively lies to the Ishmaelites and to an Egyptian official.
Why? To protect himself.
No, specifically to protect his brother's honor. He conceals the embarrassing fact that they sold him into slavery out of jealousy.
Wow. He lies to cover for the guys who sold him.
Juliette de Bouley's modern anthropological study of a rural Greek village shows the exact same dynamic today. She observes villagers lying to authorities to protect family members, quoting a villager who justifies it by saying, "God wants people to cover things up."
So, what does this all mean for us? As Reformed Christians, we subscribe to the Westminster Confession. We value objective truth. The Ninth Commandment is clear about not bearing false witness.
It is a massive tension.
How do we process reading about biblical cultures where lying to protect your brother's honor was seen as virtuous?
That is a crucial tension for any modern reader of Scripture. We have to differentiate between an honor and shame society and a guilt and innocence society.
Okay, let's break that down.
We live in a guilt and innocence society shaped largely by the Enlightenment and Reformation thinking, where objective, empirical facts determine morality.
If you lie about a fact, you are guilty, regardless of your motive.
Right. In an honor and shame society, the greater truth of family integrity often overrode the lesser truth of empirical facts. The highest moral good was preserving the family's standing in the community. To them, betraying a family member's weakness to a hostile outsider was a far greater moral failing than fudging empirical facts.
So they weren't just being malicious liars, they were serving a different moral master.
We do not have to adopt their moral framework. In fact, Scripture continually calls believers to a higher standard of truth. But we must recognize how their culture operated to understand the motivations of the people in the historical narratives.
They operated under a system where all outsiders were presumed dishonorable and dangerous until proven otherwise, and absolute loyalty was reserved strictly for the bloodline.
Because the outside world was so dangerous, protecting family honor externally was paired with an equally demanding internal expectation.
The absolute sharing of resources.
Sociologists call this concept generalized reciprocity.
Generalized reciprocity. So how does that work?
It is the practice of giving to your kin without any specification of return.
You just give it.
Yeah. You do not dictate the time, the quantity, or the quality of the return. If your brother needs a cloak, you give him your cloak.
Right.
You do not write up a loan agreement.
You don't charge interest to your brother.
Right. This is heavily contrasted with balanced reciprocity, which is basically trading goods of equal value with neighbors. Or negative reciprocity, which is trying to get something for nothing, usually by stealing from enemies.
But within the PKG, sharing resources without keeping a ledger was an absolute given.
It was a survival mechanism.
The examples in the literature are abundant. In the Book of Jubilees, Jacob sends constant provisions to his parents without asking for payment.
Yep.
In the Book of Tobit, Tobit gives his bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked, specifically among his brethren.
He takes care of his own.
There is even a wild, almost comical historical account of a diplomatic treaty between the Spartan king Areos and the Judean high priest Onias.
I love this story.
Through a massive stretch of historical imagination, they claimed a distant blood relationship through Abraham.
They basically made it up.
Right. Because they established this fiction that they were brothers, the Spartan king actually wrote in the treaty that Spartan cattle and property belonged to the Judeans, and Judean property belonged to the Spartans.
They treated each other's wealth as a shared communal pot, simply because they invoked the language of kinship.
It's crazy how powerful that word was. The flip side of sharing physical resources is the obligation of forgiving wrongs.
Yeah, sibling reconciliation is an assumed, non-negotiable ideal within this framework.
In the ancient romance of Joseph and Asenath, the willingness to reconcile with an estranged brother provides the entire resolution to the narrative conflict.
The Testament of Zebulon explicitly commands, "Do not calculate a wrong done by each to his brothers."
Retaliation, lawsuits, and holding grudges were meant for outsiders. Grace and shared resources were reserved for insiders.
But the ultimate act of reciprocity, the absolute non-negotiable duty that proved you were a loyal family member, was providing a decent burial.
Oh man, the burial issue is huge in the ancient world.
Tobit risks his life, sneaking around under threat of execution, just to bury the dead of his kin group.
We mentioned Ferrer's earlier. He tries to buy his brother's corpse from his enemy, offering massive sums of money just to give it a proper burial.
And years after a horrific massacre in the Teutoburg forest, the Roman army returns to the site and goes into a frenzy of grief, desperately trying to bury the unburied bones of 3 entire legions, treating every unknown soldier's skeleton as if it were a blood relative.
This duty was inviolable. Josephus explicitly states in his writings against Apion that the funeral ceremony must be undertaken by the nearest relatives.
To leave a relative unburied was to damn their honor permanently.
This is the precise cultural context that makes Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 8 so shocking.
People totally miss how scandalous this was.
A man tells Jesus he wants to be a disciple, but asks to first go and bury his father. To any person in a PKG society, that is the most sacred, unquestionable obligation imaginable.
You drop everything to bury your father.
And Jesus replies, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead."
That statement would have been scandalous.
To a first-century crowd, it would have sounded like madness or sheer heresy. It was radically countercultural.
It showed that Jesus was forming a new allegiance, a new family structure, that superseded even the most sacred bloodline duties of the ancient world.
That economic and emotional safety net of generalized reciprocity is what made the ancient family incredibly resilient, though.
Against famine, against war, against predatory taxation. If you had a strong sibling group, you survived.
You pooled your resources, you protected your honor, and you buried your dead.
Right. But generalized reciprocity took care of the present generation. The PKG was completely obsessed with both the past and the future.
We can call this the vertical focus.
Yeah. We have a horizontal focus in the West. We care mostly about our living relatives, the people we can text or call.
My immediate family.
Right. The Mediterranean world had a vertical focus. They were preoccupied with ancestors who were long dead and descendants who were not yet born.
Because personal honor was entirely tied to ancestral lineage,
Who your great-grandfather was determined your value in the marketplace today.
this illuminates the intense, highly charged dispute in John chapter 8 between Jesus and the Judean leaders,
It's a classic public challenge and riposte scenario.
which was a common rhetorical battle in honor-shame cultures. The religious leaders appealed to Abraham as their father to claim honor and legitimacy in front of the crowd.
And Jesus pushes back hard. He challenges their physical lineage with a spiritual one.
He tells them if they were truly Abraham's children, they would act like Abraham. The argument escalates, the tension rises, until Jesus looks at them and says, "The unthinkable, you are of your father the devil."
To a Mediterranean reader, that exchange is electrifying.
Because Jesus is attacking the very foundation of their public honor.
He is taking their vertical focus on biological ancestry and completely reframing it around spiritual obedience and faith.
That vertical focus also extends forward into the future through the preoccupation with inheritance.
This wasn't about getting your individual slice of the pie when your parents die so you can go buy a sports car or take a vacation.
It was about keeping the estate intact to ensure the family's survival and honor for the next generation.
The story of Naboth's vineyard in 1 Kings 21 is the perfect illustration of this mindset.
King Ahab wants Naboth's vineyard to turn it into a vegetable garden. He goes to Naboth and offers him a better vineyard in exchange, or the full cash value.
From a Western capitalist perspective, it is a great deal. Take the cash and upgrade.
But Naboth flatly refuses the king of Israel. He tells Ahab, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers."
To Naboth, that plot of dirt was not a commodity. It was the physical manifestation of his family's bloodline, their history, and their honor.
I think of it like modern inherited wealth tied to a historic estate. Naboth treated the land not as a commodity to be sold for a quick profit, but as a sacred trust.
He wasn't the owner. He was just the current manager of his ancestors' estate.
His job was to pass it down. To sell it to an outsider, even the king, would be a huge betrayal of his forefathers and his unborn descendants.
The retention of that inheritance was the only way to preserve the descent group's honor in the community. It was a collective asset, not individual wealth.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground here. Let's pull together the core elements of the patrilineal kinship group.
We are looking at a system built on contractual marriage aimed at family status.
We see patrilineal living, where the incoming wife is essentially an alien worker relying on male children for survival.
We see intense, unbreakable sibling solidarity that trumps marital bonds.
We see aggressive defense of family honor, total resource sharing through generalized reciprocity, and a deep vertical focus on ancestors and inheritance.
When you lay all that out, you finally see the magnitude of what the early Christian leaders did.
Under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, they deliberately co-opted this exact cultural framework.
They took the most exclusive, blood-based, closed-door institution in the ancient world and applied it to a group of completely unrelated people, Jews, Gentiles, slaves, free, men, women, who shared faith in Christ.
They leveled the social playing field completely. High-status Roman citizens and wealthy merchants began calling indigent, poor members brothers.
They engaged in generalized reciprocity, voluntarily sharing their wealth and property with people who did not share a single drop of their physical blood.
They created a surrogate descent group. It was so effective, so radical, and so visible that outsiders were stunned.
Look at the historical record of Julian the Apostate. He was a Roman emperor who despised Christians and tried to revive paganism.
He wrote letters in sheer frustration about the impious Galileans, complaining bitterly that these Christians supported not only their own poor, but the pagan poor as well.
They were acting out the absolute highest duties of PKG siblings,
Right.
but extending that safety net far beyond the biological bloodline.
They redefined consanguinity. Instead of sharing the blood of a physical patriarch like Abraham or a Roman noble, they shared the blood of Christ.
That shared blood brought them into a new patrilineal kin group, complete with all the rigorous expectations of sibling solidarity, resource sharing, honor defense, and mutual care.
Consider this. When Jesus looked at the crowd sitting around him and said, "Whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother," he wasn't giving a warm, sentimental illustration for a greeting card.
No, it was so much more than that.
He was completely dismantling the most rigid, legally binding, and socially exclusive institution of the ancient world and drafting a new inheritance contract with his own blood. How does reading the New Testament through the lens of first-century family values change the way you view your own local church?